This training video is sponsored by the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services in partnership with the Tennessee Association of Mental Health Organizations, TAMHO. Funding was provided in part under Grant Number 6, H79SM08-6148, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. The views, policies, and opinions expressed are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect those of SAMHSA or HHS. This learning series is entitled Tools for School-Based Providers, Assessing Risk for Psychosis in Youth. The program will provide an overview of psychosis and psychosis-risk syndromes, followed by issues regarding assessment and intervention. It will include a primer on the use of the SIPS and the PRIME screen, and touch on assessment best practices and use of existing screening instruments. The entire presentation will be tailored to the needs of schools to provide services for those at risk for psychosis in schools. Learning objectives include 1. Define attenuated subthreshold symptoms typically assessed to determine psychosis risk status. 2. Identify psychosis risk assessment strategies. 3. Describe psychosocial interventions for youth at risk for psychosis. Presenting this topic is Dr. Jason Schiffman. Jason Schiffman, a professor at the University of California, Irvine, earned his PhD in clinical psychology from USC. His research advances the identification and treatment of individuals at risk for psychosis, focusing on refining diagnostics, implementing psychosocial interventions, reducing stigma, and promoting health for all. With over 200 publications, he has secured over $20 million in funding, including several active NIMH grants involving individuals at clinical high risk, CHR, for psychosis. Dr. Schiffman co-founded 3 university community partnerships, including a SAMHSA-funded CHRP program, and is among the few certified trainers of the structured interview for psychosis-risk syndromes. He also consults for CHRP programs nationwide. Join me in welcoming Dr. Jason Schiffman.
Hi everyone, my name is Jason Schiffman and I'm a professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of California at Irvine. And today's topic, education, special education, and accommodations for students with psychosis, working with youth, families, teachers, and schools. The objectives are here. Describe federal laws that can be used to support students with psychosis, identify differences and components of IEP and 504 plans, generate a list of actions that can be taken to support students with psychosis in schools, and develop the tools required for an individualized strategy towards collaboration with schools and families. The objectives will play themselves out in the form of the following outline. It's like an overview of psychosis, with us thinking about psychosis as it might look and be detected in schools. Then we'll walk through supported education as a foundation, which will be a springboard for us to think about individualized educational programs within schools, especially for our kids in high school. The role of school and how schools can be so important in mental health services, not just for psychosis, but for an array of mental health challenges that students might experience. We'll cover that as well. We'll spend some time talking about distinctions and characteristics of 504 plans and IEPs. And this last point here will be infused throughout. Ways in which we can help within the context of schools, ways in which we can help each other, and ways in which we can help some of our most vulnerable young people with risk for psychosis or early psychosis. I'd like to start by sharing a story about a family I worked with several years ago. I've, of course, changed the names, but Miss Smith called me about her 2 children, her 28-year-old son, Thomas, and her 17-year-old daughter, Jane. Thomas had developed schizophrenia at the age of 20, dropping out of school and leaving home abruptly at that time. Thomas was now living without housing in a distant town in the county, completely removed from social connection, healthcare, and employment, as well as refusing to speak to the family, or others for that matter, riddled with paranoia. Miss Smith couldn't talk about Thomas without breaking down in tears. In her words, she had, quote unquote, lost her son. Now, Miss Smith primarily came to me, however, because of her daughter, Jane. Jane had been fun-loving and bright, poised to attend community college, soon. And things began, however, to change more recently. And Miss Smith worried that Jane was going to follow the path of her brother. Jane began having unusual ideas that she couldn't shake, leading her to feel mistrustful whenever she left the house. She felt like she was, quote unquote, going crazy and also had been thinking about killing herself. Now, I just want you to just pause for a minute and take a second and think for a moment. What services and supports would you want for this family? Just begin to generate some thoughts and ideas inside your mind and think about what would be best for them. You know, it's such a broad question, and there's no single right answer. But for me, the way I framed it and contextualized it was to think about building connections with and for the family. In this case, a very vulnerable member of our community who might be struggling with issues related to psychosis or psychosis risk in Jane's situation. I wanted to connect them with folks early in their journey. With Jane, we had the chance to connect her uh, prior to the manifestation of full psychosis catching hold, as it had for her brother Thomas. By finding folks so they don't fall through the cracks, I think we can offer them brighter lights of hope and promise. Now, hope is always there, no matter what or where you meet someone in their journey. But earlier on, that message of hope is a little bit brighter. So I took a broad approach to the question of what I would want for this family. And I considered the importance of building connection with them, especially for them as they struggle with issues related to psychosis. And I think by reaching out before folks fall through the cracks, we can offer people a better chance of living a life in the community, a life of their choosing, a life that they want to live. In Jane's case, I am very happy to report that we were able to connect her to others early, actually, in large part because of her mother and how her mother reached out to us quickly upon recognizing warning signs. Additionally, and I think probably critically, we were able to connect and effectively collaborate with her school. It was the work with her school that I think really helped facilitate her getting back on track. There was a coordinated effort to wrap her with academic, emotional, and behavioral supports that included, among other things, compassion, patience, flexibility, kindness, and an understanding from school staff and teachers that would help get her through. Now, from my perspective, the collective work significantly influenced her long-term trajectory and wellness in very, very positive ways. And this is the goal. This is the goal of all we do, to increase the likelihood that someone will have a positive trajectory and to be able to live a life of their choosing, a life in the community, a life that they really want to pursue. Schools and our work as mental health providers and all the work that all of us do are a big part of contributing to reaching those goals. Now, one of the biggest motivators for early identification and work with folks early on in the course of psychosis is this concept referred to as the duration of untreated psychosis. The reason it's so important is because DUP, as it's known for short, is associated with just about anything negative that you can think of. So longer DUP is bad. If you think about this arrow as the passage of time, at this point where it says onset of psychosis, it can be thought of as when a person crosses threshold for a full diagnosable disorder related to psychosis. And then further on, that point where intervention is implemented, that's the point of the time between these 2 points. The duration of time between these 2 points is called the duration of untreated psychosis. And in the US, not too long ago, on average, DUP lasts around a little less than 2 years. We're beginning to lower it as a society. But the longer this period, the worse the outcome. Traditional longstanding programs like outpatient care, or if you're lucky, coordinated specialty care, which is the gold standard for treating people with psychosis, they're offered for folks further along in their mental health journey. And that's where Thomas was when Miss Smith called me. This is when he received his first care, well past the 2 years of the duration of untreated psychosis on average. And unfortunately, he quickly dropped out for a variety of different reasons, including lack of motivation and sort of an inability to understand what was, or feeling driven towards getting the help that would have really served him well. Um, Fortunately, we were able to connect with Jane earlier. All right. And the goal here um, is to move the needle much further back in time, working with folks before they cross threshold for psychosis, soon after the onset of risk, has the potential to prevent further deterioration and possibly prevent psychosis altogether. And I think it made a huge difference in Jane's well-being and her ultimate trajectory. Now, sometimes we refer to that point where it says the onset of risk was as the risk begins. We'll talk about that sometimes, and we talk about that as the duration of untreated illness. Now, in Jane's case, there was no duration of untreated illness. We're able to work with her right away, and sometimes we can forestall psychosis if psychosis is the destined outcome. Sometimes we might mitigate the implications of psychosis if psychosis is the destined outcome. And sometimes, and perhaps in Jane's cases, or excuse me, in Jane's case, we can contribute to prevention. Now, I'd like to think that early intervention was a contributor to Jane's positive outcome. I think it's important to emphasize that schools can play a huge role in reaching these goals. It makes common sense, but schools are a good place for mental health services. This is where most kids are most of the time. This is just one study here that I'm showing. One of my friends shared with me, but um, it illustrates a really important point. In this study of kids who were getting a trauma-specific treatment after Hurricane Katrina, 57 of 58 who were approached in schools started treatment, with 91% of them finishing treatment. In contrast, only about 23% of kids offered care in local communities through mental health clinics began treatment, and then only 15 in total completed. So this study wasn't designed to illustrate this point per se, but I think this point is really important in that it's just one of probably many examples that affirm common sense that schools are a great place to engage students across a variety of different contexts. Academic, of course, but mental health and inclusive of psychosis risk or early psychosis as well. So, who experiences psychosis symptoms? Well, adolescence is really crucial here. So onset generally occurs between the ages of 15 to 25. And this is critical because adolescents at risk, those who are adolescents who are at risk for psychosis, they're much more like those at risk for various other mental health concerns. This is a core developmental window for mental health considerations. Folks are vulnerable with respect to their mental wellness during this age 15 to 25 window, essentially during the traditional high school years and college years. As I've sort of alluded to already, addressing psychosis in schools can be really, really helpful. Now, nearly all youth at risk or experiencing early psychosis are attending schools. Although not universally, there is considerable evidence indicating that many providers do have experience in this area. In a survey probing experience with psychosis, 87%, almost 9 out of 10 of school providers reported having worked with at least one student who exhibited symptoms of psychosis at some point in their careers. Now, working with schools presents unique challenges, often involving barriers to effective communication and collaboration. Establishing trust with school personnel can be difficult as roles and responsibilities vary. Some of the fundamental challenges include obtaining consent and assent, managing permission slips, navigating bureaucratic processes, and addressing privacy rights. Additionally, stigma around mental health is pervasive, affecting not just the individual with the mental health condition, but also their peers, teachers, administrators, and staff. Overcoming this stigma requires a comprehensive approach. Other practical issues include coordinating with teachers who have large classes often and limited support, making it difficult to align schedules and priorities. To effectively engage with school personnel and create connections for students with early psychosis, it's really important to identify and work with a champion or an ally within the school who can help navigate and break down these barriers. This ally can facilitate communication, promote understanding, and support the integration of mental health initiatives within the school environment. Furthermore, I want to end this slide with this point. Attention to psychosis is somewhat limited in schools, leading to the potential for young people with psychosis or risk symptoms to fall through the cracks. Now, this slide presents findings from a study we conducted several years ago. We surveyed mental health providers to identify whether they specialized in working with adults or youth. We then assessed their comfort level and training in dealing with psychosis or working with folks with psychosis, as well as their ability to address developmental considerations in children and families with school settings. And our key findings were this. Youth-focused mental health providers reported being undertrained and uncomfortable working with schizophrenia and psychosis spectrum disorders. Despite this, they were highly skilled in working within schools, engaging families, and understanding developmental considerations. Meanwhile, our adult-focused providers, they had more experience and comfort in working with psychosis. However, they lacked training in working with families and youth in school environments and were less sensitive to developmental and contextual factors. So you see here some systemic challenges that get in the way and potentially create challenges for our young people in this age range. Public mental health systems, including schools, but not limited to schools, are often divided by age, especially during the transition from 17 to 18. This segmentation can result in young people falling through the cracks during this critical period, leading to, among other things, prolonged duration of untreated psychosis. This issue reflects the structure of schools and the training provided to mental health professionals. I will say this. We did find a subset of providers specializing in transition-aged youth or emerging adulthood phases of life. And these specialists were great. They were well prepared to handle both psychosis and developmental considerations. So there is room for workforce development and systems of care to adjust to best support some of these young folks at risk of falling through the cracks. And I think it's important to emphasize that there are implications for training and policy decisions in all of this. So addressing these gaps requires dismantling the bifurcation in mental health and educational systems so that folks are getting trained appropriately. We have to align societal systems to better support this unique developmental window. And if we can do this, this could lead to educational reforms and workforce that's more equipped to support individuals at risk for psychosis and to prevent other mental health concerns from falling through the cracks as well. Leadership and policy changes are really important to integrate services and training across the transition from youth to adulthood. Now, a comprehensive approach, in my opinion, it's really essential for enhancing the mental health, the educational, and the community support of that's required of successful systems of care. And of course, schools can play a crucial role in addressing the problems of long duration of untreated psychosis. I wanted to bring up one study in particular. This is a particularly noteworthy project conducted some years ago in Norway and Denmark, and it exemplifies the potential of schools. This initiative featured a comprehensive anti-stigma educational outreach program that spanned across several counties, with schools being a key component. The project successfully reduced the duration of untreated psychosis in the community from an already impressive 15 weeks to just 5 weeks, and schools were a major contributor to this outcome. The broad-based educational efforts involved not just schools, but the entire community, creating a supportive and informed environment. Supporting research around this project and related suggests that increasing familiarity with psychosis through presentations and educational efforts like this one boosts confidence in engaging with individuals showing early signs of psychosis. So, educating school personnel specifically can enhance the implementation of screening programs as well as increase the likelihood of individuals experiencing early psychosis being recognized and identified. By integrating psychoeducation into school systems, either formally or informally, I think we stand a chance to significantly impact the early identification and then ultimately the treatment of risk for early psychosis, thereby reducing the duration of untreated psychosis and then ultimately increasing positive outcomes, as we saw for Jane. Now, as I mentioned earlier, engaging schools in addressing psychosis can be challenging due to limited attention to the issue. However, there is significant promise in the idea that screening and referrals within schools are not only possible, but also highly effective. In that pursuit, a notable example comes from a study led by our team, about a few years old now. But in this study, we focused on children with a parent diagnosed with schizophrenia, thereby putting the student at genetically increased risk of developing psychosis when they got older. The team assessed these children when they were 11 to 12 years old, roughly, and incorporating a teacher rating as part of that evaluation. Years later, we followed up with these individuals after they had passed through the high risk window for psychosis to determine their diagnostic outcomes. And remarkably, teacher ratings from when the children were 11 to 12 years old emerged as one of the strongest predictors of which children, despite not showing symptoms at that age, but which children at 11 to 12 would eventually develop psychosis. This finding suggests that teachers can play an important role in detecting future risk of psychosis, highlighting the potential for effective early identification and screening programs within schools that could potentially lead to early intervention strategies as well. Okay. Implementing screening for psychosis in schools involves several important considerations and questions to address. First, it's important to determine who will conduct the screening. Potential candidates include teachers, administrative staff, counselors, or a combination of these different roles. It's important to decide whether teachers will distribute the screening tools or if another staff member will. Who's going to take on this responsibility? When it comes to the actual screening process itself, self-report tools such as brief checklists or mental health surveys can be effective. These tools should be easy for students to complete and hopefully, ideally, seamlessly integrated into the school environment so as to make it easy for everyone and reduce stigma. However, several logistic challenges should be considered before getting into this. Budgetary constraints are a significant factor oftentimes, as funding is required not only for the screening tools themselves, which in some cases are free, but also sometimes for training and managing the process and the data that comes in and being responsive to the screening. Additionally, this is one that's not often thought of, but attendance can impact the effectiveness of screening. Some of the most vulnerable students are the most likely to have spotty attendance. So conducting screening on multiple days can help ensure more comprehensive coverage and reduce the likelihood of missing some vulnerable at-risk students. Another key consideration is the scope of the screening. Decisions need to be made about whether the screening will be universal, involving all students, or targeted, focused only on those who, say, are visiting the counseling center or show specific risk factors or some sort or another. Lastly, the appropriate screening tool is something we should consider. The tool chosen should be validated for early psychosis detection and suitable for school settings. This includes being brief enough to be completed quickly, but comprehensive enough to identify potential risk. And it could be a subscale woven into existing tools as well. So different ideas to consider here. Now, by addressing these questions, as well as the array of considerations I put forth here, schools can effectively integrate psychosis screening into their support systems, potentially identifying at-risk students early, and then ultimately connecting them with interventions that might alter their trajectories in really positive ways. Here's some recommendations for effective risk screening tools for schools. Now, the Prime Screen is that was developed by experts, and it's a concise 12-item tool that is brief and quick and easy to administer. Another great option is the PQB, which tends to be more contextually responsive, and it's also actually both of these are free, but the PQB can be found on Mental Health America's website. Now, for schools already using mental health checklists, like the BASC-3, they have an atypicality scale that's useful. And the CBCL is another tool that schools sometimes use. The thought problem scale is another valuable option to consider. Both of them offer broad assessment for depression, anxiety, cognitive disorders, in addition to a lot of other challenges, and are inclusive of psychosis risk. So there's benefits there. Lastly, I want to say we were able to develop a 2-item screen in collaboration with schools designed for quick administration when time is limited. So those 2 items it could be even faster than some of the other ones. Now, not as thorough as the other tools, the 2-item screening, it's effective in flagging students that might benefit from additional evaluation. So these tools, they vary in depth and accessibility, with the Prime and the PQB offering concise screens, the BASC-3 or the CBCL or the YSR integrating into broader screening programs for mental health, and the 2-item screen serving as like a quick first step. But whatever the case may be, follow-up often includes, after the screening, a gold standard psychosis risk interview, such as the structured interview for psychosis risk syndromes, or the SIPs. But the idea being that screening is a good first step for additional comprehensive evaluation. Self-report tools, they offer numerous strengths, like those I just mentioned in the prior slide. They can help identify individuals who are not currently receiving services, thereby reducing the duration of untreated psychosis. These tools also enhance the efficiency and accuracy of more in-depth clinical interviews, like the semi-structured interview I mentioned on the last slide, the SIPs, the structured interview for psychosis risk syndromes. Self-report tools can be used to monitor symptom progression over time. For instance, our mental health clinic that we have in Irvine, and the ones that we were running in Maryland, we used the Prime Screen weekly at every clinic visit to get a sense as to the progress or the trajectory of a person's risk symptoms over time. This practice, it allowed my therapist to track symptom progression and make timely adjustments to treatment plans. Additionally, there's substantial evidence suggesting that the act of assessment, just evaluating things and taking stock, in and of itself can be therapeutic. It is part of the therapeutic process in more ways than one. The process of self-reflection and engagement during assessment, it has healing effects. Now, there are important caveats to consider when implementing screening tools, despite all of this therapeutic benefits and early screening gains that we get. Contextual factors, such as the environment and the individual's background, can significantly impact the effectiveness of these tools. So it's essential to take nuance into account to ensure accurate and meaningful results. I want to share a few studies that highlight the complexity of screening and underscore the importance of considering contextual factors when screening young people. These studies provide some insight into the challenges and also the benefits of using self-report tools in various settings, helping to refine our approach to mental health assessments and interventions. But I think I'm going to share some of the findings in a moment. But the thing to really bear in mind is that it's critical to make sure that there's a shared understanding between you as you intend the questions to be understood and the student or the child or the young person and how they are understanding it. They can say yes to questions and mean yes and be being truthful. But if they have a different understanding of the question, that yes is going to mean something different than it means to you. So this problem can arise pretty regularly with self-report screening tools when the young person is just reading the questions. If you have a conversation with them and ask them to tell you what they mean when they said yes to a particular item, then a lot of those challenges can be resolved. This first study I want to share with you examined the use of self-report questionnaires in screenings of youth. The research found that younger students, in particular younger, when completing these questionnaires, were more likely to over-endorse or affirm items in ways that didn't align with the intended clinical meaning. This discrepancy wasn't related to clinical high risk for psychosis or psychosis risk, but rather to other developmental factors. They were saying yes to these questions for different reasons other than risk. Essentially, there was a lack of shared understanding between the intended meaning of the written questions and the younger participants, in particular, their interpretation. To address this, we need to engage with the youth to ensure they comprehended the accuracy of the questions accurately. As participants aged, their understanding with respect to the screening tools and the screening tools' intended meanings improved, leading to more reliable responses. The key takeaway is that while these screening tools can be valuable, they should be used with caution, especially when assessing younger children, particularly those aged 12 to 14 in this study. The specificity of these tools tended to be lower in the younger age group, resulting in a higher rate of false positives. This highlights the importance of context and clear communication in the assessment process. Here's another study. This one investigated the effectiveness of the PRIME screen, another self-report screening tool, across different demographic groups, specifically comparing Black and white participants. The findings here revealed that the PRIME screen was statistically predictive of clinician-interviewed determined outcomes for white participants, but did not show statistically significant relations for Black participants. The discrepancy between the self-report measures and what could be gathered by talking to the client, so the self-report versus the interviews, suggested that the PRIME screen wasn't as effective in predicting psychosis risk for Black participants as it was for white participants. On average, the Black participants' responses didn't predict psychosis risk as accurately, indicating a need for greater context and understanding that can be had through conversations, speaking with one another. This led to a higher rate of false positives among these participants without those conversations. And the study highlights that there was not a shared understanding between the intent of the measure to assess early psychosis and the interpretation of the questions by many of the participants. It underscored the importance of incorporating more contextual factors and direct communication to ensure accurate assessment across diverse demographic groups. We have to listen, we have to talk, and we have to have conversations, and we have to recognize that our clients are the experts on themselves. I mentioned the 2-item tool earlier, and I believe it can be a really important component of early screening for psychosis. If there's one practical takeaway from anything I say today, it might be this. You don't need to ask verbatim these questions, but consider asking something like these 2 questions. Do you ever hear a voice that other people cannot hear? And have you ever felt like someone was playing with your mind? If someone responds affirmatively to either question, it's important to delve deeper. Ask them to elaborate on their experiences. Consider using other self-report tools mentioned earlier, like the PRIME screen or the PQB, and discuss the potential for psychosis or psychosis risk. The predictive power of these two questions is pretty strong given their simplicity. However, I will say that the second question, have you ever felt like someone was playing with your mind? It can yield many false positives, so often related to other issues rather than psychosis. Therefore, once again, it's essential to have a thorough conversation to understand the context of their responses and determine the appropriate next steps. All right, those were my thoughts on screening and its application in schools. So now I'd like to shift gears and discuss supported education. Supported education is typically designed to help individuals further along in their mental health journey who have already established psychosis to re engage with education after facing challenges related to psychosis. However, I believe that its principles can be effectively applied to early psychosis and risk for psychosis, um, especially in the high school settings, as well as college. Now, this table provides a foundation for considering supported education alongside familiar concepts like case management and supported employment. Supported education shares many commonalities with these approaches, such as providing coordinated care and tailored support. However, there are some key differences. In the context of supported education, staff should be knowledgeable about the education system, about financial aid, about personal support, and academic accommodations. These areas require specialized understanding to effectively support students with early psychosis in their educational pursuits. As we continue our conversation today, I'd like to delve deeper into these aspects and explore how we can better implement supported education principles in school settings. By drawing parallels with case management and supported employment, we can better appreciate the unique needs of students with early psychosis and also develop strategies to support their educational goals. I perceive this as more of a holistic approach, and this holistic approach will not only aid in their academic success, but also contribute to their overall well being and recovery, allowing them to reach the goals that they want to reach. All right. There's 8 principles associated with supported education that I want to cover with you all today, because I think they're really applicable to supporting young people with early psychosis or at risk for psychosis. The first is access to education and positive forward progress. This principle emphasizes that all students who wish to return to or continue their education should have the opportunity to do so. The goal is not merely to keep students occupied, but to facilitate their long-term goals, their educational growth, and their personal development. Second one is about inclusive services. If a student wants to pursue education, they should have access to supported education services regardless of psychiatric diagnosis, symptoms, cognitive impairment, substance abuse history, or other challenges. No one should be excluded if they are interested in continuing their schooling and are willing to attend classes with the necessary supports. Early intervention, point 3. Early intervention is great. A quick response coupled with support and encouragement helps individuals return to a productive role. This is particularly important for early psychosis, where timing and timely intervention can significantly impact outcomes through a reduction of duration of untreated psychosis. Integration with mental health care. Education and educational support should be integrated with mental health. Coordination between educational services and mental health treatment teams ensures that all team members, including mental health practitioners, supports, peer supports, etc., are all on the same page with respect to the client's educational goals. This holistic approach fosters a comprehensive support system that really can support a young person. Point 5 is non-time limited support. Support should not be time limited. Recovery can take time, and expanding the timeline allows individuals a better chance at recovery or reaching their educational goals without the pressure of strict deadlines. Client-driven process is number 6. The supported education process, it should be driven by the student's preferences and goals. So too should the mental health process. So shared decision-making should be our North Star. Students are most motivated and work hardest when pursuing something they truly want. Their choices should guide the educational and the mental health process. A strength-based approach is also important. Supported education should focus on the student's existing strengths. By leveraging what they're good at, what they want, what their passions are, students can achieve their educational and life goals more readily. Emphasizing growth and realistic hope, but hope in particular, is key to this principle. The last one I have here is meaningful roles. The role of the student is meaningful. Individuals with psychosis or at risk for psychosis, they share many similarities with others. And being a student, a worker, a family member, or a friend provides context for a meaningful life. These roles contribute to a sense of purpose and belonging. I'll say by adhering to these 8 principles, or at least thinking about them, integrating them the best we can, supported education can create an inclusive and supportive and effective educational environment that helps individuals with mental health concerns, in particular psychosis or psychosis risk, but broadly as well, achieve their academic as well as their personal and likely their mental health goals. Supported education can effectively identify students' strengths as well as their challenges. SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Agency, their supported education toolkit offers a range of valuable resources. So I really want to emphasize their toolkit as something that you should turn to if you're interested in this topic. One particularly useful clinical tool is the use of checklists more broadly. And the checklist that they have in the toolkit includes examples of strengths and potential challenges such as concentration, study skills, and meeting deadlines. These things can help initiate and guide conversations with clients for treatment planning. This process, it helps understand how the young person's doing academically, identifies areas where they may be struggling, and provides some guidance for where to begin in terms of what steps to take next. For instance, a worksheet from the toolkit can help develop personalized plans by highlighting academic issues like coping, restlessness, making friends, racing thoughts, and distractibility. By using these checklists and others to inspire semi-structured or even open-ended conversations, you can gather more details and more information that will help create a comprehensive and effective plan that helps a person's mental well-being as well as their educational pursuits. Additionally, the toolkit includes prompts to explore the challenges or barriers students have or students may face in the or have faced in the past and might face as well as in the future, especially if they've had a break from school, whether summer break or a break because of some sort of mental health reason. The questions here can help predict or anticipate what might work better for them going forward. So being proactive in the approach. For example, checklists can cover barriers like transportation issues, past failures, side effects of medication, and other potential challenges that you might not think about if you weren't thinking through the toolkit and the checklist here, barriers to educational check sheet. I think by addressing the barriers, you can really better support the student's educational journey from the get-go in a really proactive way. In this slide, I'm sharing a couple of documents that we put out a few years back with the support of NASHBID and SAMHSA. One of these documents is intended to help schools and school employees who have a student that they're working with psychosis. We also created a companion document designed for families to help them work with schools if they have a loved one with psychosis. These documents are user-friendly and contain what I hope and I intended to be valuable information. In these documents, we define terms such as IEPs and 504 plans. Both are options for many kids at risk for or experiencing early psychosis in terms of services. And will those 504s and IEPs, that'll be the focus of the next segment of the presentation. But these documents should be freely available with a quick Google search if you're interested in diving deeper. Okay, individual education program and a 504 plan. They can both be very helpful. Now, IEPs are designed specifically for students with disabilities who require special education services. Um, they're developed by a team of professionals, including the student, if they wish, parents, teachers, and other relevant contributors to a team. They outline the student's specific educational needs, goals, objectives, services, and necessary accommodations. 504 plans on the, well, they're similar, but they provide accommodations and modifications for students with disabilities, ensuring that the students have access to the same educational opportunities as as their peers that don't have similar disabilities. They don't include specialized instruction per se, but they focus more on ensuring accessibility to the general education curriculum. They're developed by a team that usually includes parents and teachers. And the 504s tend to be a little less formal than IEPs. Just a little more information on this topic now. I'm going to go through different elements and aspects of both IEPs and 504s just to give you a sense or flavor for it. But if you're interested in these topics, there's a bevy of resources on the internet that can help parse through things. But I'll start by just saying that IEPs, in terms of eligibility, to qualify, a student must have a disability recognized under IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that requires specialized instruction. 504 plans, on the other hand, to qualify, a student must have a disability that substantially limits a major life activity, such as learning. So slightly different language there in the terminology. In terms of services provided, IEPs offer specialized instruction and related services like speech therapy, occupational therapy. They also include academic accommodations, but that specialized services, specialized instruction, that oftentimes is quite comprehensive. 504 plans provide accommodations and modifications, such as extended time for tests, preferential seating, stuff like that, to help students access the general education curriculum. Again, IEP is a little more formal and comprehensive, requiring full evaluation, actually, of the student's needs, annual reviews, and reevaluations at least every 3 years, or requiring every 3 years. 504s, just to give you a flavor, a little less formal, but still formal, may not require as full of an evaluation, but also should include regular check-ins and updates. IEPs are governed by special education law under IDEA, whereas 504 plans are governed by civil rights laws, specifically the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So little notes there in case any legal stuff comes into play. Now, when we talk about what's actually in an IEP versus a 504 plan, the bigger picture is this. IEPs are more comprehensive and focused on specialized instruction plus supports, while 504s are about access, making sure students can participate through accommodations. Now, both spell out what a student needs, who's responsible, and how progress will be tracked, but the depth and scope, they differ. I guess you could roughly think of IEPs as more or less more full service plan, and 504s as more or less targeted support plans. But both can overlap considerably. Okay, here are some references if you're interested in digging deeper into these areas. And all of these can help you further your understanding of 504s and IEPs. Now we'll talk about some possible interventions and accommodations that we can consider for serving our young people in schools at risk for psychosis. So thinking about accommodations, this is really important. They can be incredibly helpful for students with mental health concerns related to psychosis, impacting their educational opportunities and beyond. The universe of accommodations isn't completely limitless, but there are certain accommodations that are widely agreed upon as being effective for most students, regardless of their mental health status. And being creative can be really helpful here as well. What you see here on this slide, a few things to consider as services that might benefit a young person with psychosis, that could help their education and their general well-being. Therapy, That's the first one. Medication support, having a school nurse or designated staff member help administer medications can be part of that thing that comes to mind. Um, Symptom triggers. Identifying and mitigating triggers that could exacerbate symptoms can be really helpful. Alternative environments, such as offering quiet spaces or alternative assignments, in that same vein, such as allowing written reports instead of an oral presentation, have sometimes been pointed towards by family members and youth as very beneficial. Preferential seating, ensuring a student sits in a location that minimizes distractions. Extra time, allowing additional time for tests and assignments is really helpful for many, many young people. Um, but all of these accommodations can benefit any child, really, but especially those with mental health concerns, including mental health concerns related to psychosis. The key is, I think, to tailor these accommodations to the unique needs of the student with whom you're working, ensuring that they're implemented correctly, that there's good follow through, and that they're done in a way that makes sense for your student. The real creativity and effectiveness comes from individualizing these accommodations to fit the specific requirements of the student you're working with and the context in which they are learning, or they find themselves in their school. This personalization ensures that the accommodations are not only appropriate, but also genuinely supportive of the student's educational success. All right, here are a few resources I wanted to share. This is another screenshot from the SAMHSA toolkit that I mentioned earlier. It includes suggestions for accommodations that accommodate various challenges. For students who are easily distracted, perhaps using an audio recorder for class can be beneficial. For short attention spans, books on tape or audiobooks might be helpful. For students who are extremely restless, allowing them to leave class for breaks can be an effective accommodation. You don't always need a direct problem to accommodation match, I don't think, but understanding the problem can help tailor the accommodations more effectively to the specific need. On this slide, this is a screenshot from the Job Accommodation Network. You can type in schizophrenia into the search button, and it generates a bunch of other ideas that might be applicable to the educational setting vis-a-vis respect to psychosis. It's not perfect or flawless, but it's worth poking around to see if it helps generate any new ideas that could lead to some creativity between you and the person you're serving. Another resource is from the Accommodation Central website, and it allows you to input parameters and see what accommodations it suggests. One of the things I find useful about this resource, as well as the SAMHSA toolkit for that matter, is that it focuses on symptoms or challenges rather than specific disorders. For example, if a student has difficulty focusing, a challenge that cuts across any number of diagnoses, the resource might suggest peer tutoring as a possible accommodation. Now, this approach tailors solutions to specific needs, and in that case, attempting to be both adaptable and effective. All right, I've emphasized throughout that creativity and individualization are really important when working with students, clients, students with psychosis or early psychosis. It's important to listen to your client and their experiences. Ask structured questions and understand the context in which they live to assess what's possible and what they want and where they're going. Listening and learning can come from various sources, not just the client or their family members. Teachers, nurses, counselors, administrators, even coaches who interact with the children often know them very well and know them specifically in their context. They can provide valuable insight into the child's needs and how to best support them. Stigma is a significant barrier that might need to be attended to as well. It prevents people from accessing the help and care they need in many cases. The students can internalize negative beliefs and fear the consequences of sharing their struggling. As people that are supporting these young people, we can play a role in breaking down stigma. Be proactive. Work with schools early and aim to prevent crises before they occur. Another great tip. In our work with Jane, the client I mentioned at the very beginning, we followed her and her family's lead. So following the lead here of your client or family, prioritizing their needs and their goals. This approach not only respects their preference, but also increases their motivation. And, I think it's essential to create a partnership where the client feels empowered to make decisions and feels like you are working with them and not just calling all the shots. The last thing I'll say is recovery, or a person's ability to reach the goals that they want to reach. We should be thinking about this as the expectation and not the exception. Regardless of where a person is in their mental health journey or their educational journey, there's always hope. And expressing this hope and the power of recovery is a very powerful tool in achieving positive outcomes for all of our clients. Now, on this slide, I want to talk about tips for working with teachers. I think, in short, our teachers are amazing and underappreciated. But educating teachers about the symptoms of psychosis and how to manage them, as well as understanding how these symptoms manifest in their students, can significantly enhance their ability to support their students and do their jobs in ways that they really would want to do even better than they already are. It's important to help teachers understand that students with psychosis who may appear disruptive are not trying to be difficult, but are grappling with some challenge, maybe, for instance, internal challenges beyond that student's control. This empathy, or this understanding, it enables teachers to become empathic advocates and be a part of support systems for their students. It's also important to note that individuals with psychosis are far more likely to be victims of violence rather than perpetrators. And I emphasize this in the context of schools because bullying is a significant issue in schools and shouldn't be tolerated. Increased adult supervision and sensitivity to bullying in general can make a big difference, especially for students in the early phases of psychosis. Suicidality. Suicidality is another prominent concern. 2 out of 3 people identified as at risk for psychosis report active suicidality, and 1 in 5 already have an attempted suicide. These statistics are alarmingly high, particularly in the early phases of illness when individuals are trying to make sense of their changing mental health and may feel hopeless. One suicide reduction program that we put forth and believe in is called the Youth Nominated Support Teams model. It's out of Michigan, but it aims to expand the support network of individuals at risk for psychosis, helping to reduce suicidality and keep them engaged in treatment. Providing support, warmth, compassion, and friendship can significantly reduce the risk of suicide. I'll end this slide by saying that all individuals, regardless of their mental health status, share more similarities than differences. The strategies and support systems that work for people with psychosis are often the same as those that benefit anyone, highlighting our common humanity and the universal need for understanding and support. Okay. So I wanted to circle back to our conversation about Jane. Now, as I mentioned at the very beginning, Jane is a 17-year-old junior in high school. Her mom called me or our team concerned about preventing a negative trajectory similar to Jane's older brother, Thomas, who I mentioned developed schizophrenia in his early 20s and now was, sort of had pronounced symptoms and was somewhat separated from the family. Jane, on the other hand, was much earlier in the course of concerns with respect to mental health. And prior to her junior year, she was functioning relatively typically, quite adaptively, actually, but had some mental health stumbles in her junior year, prompting her mom to reach out to me. So I want to read this vignette, and I have some questions that I'll sort of pose here, like you see question number 1 at the bottom of this slide, and I'll give you some of my thoughts to these questions, but you can think about the questions as we go along. Okay, so let's see here. So this is about Jane. So she had recently started experiencing early signs of psychosis, such as hearing mumbled conversations when no one was around and having beliefs that she could predict the future. She began acting in accordance with her predictions and was becoming preoccupied with them at the expense of social relationships. Seeing groups of other kids triggered her to hear the mumbled conversations, which she tended to interpret as other students perhaps plotting against her. Ms. Smith called my team for an evaluation. After a thorough diagnostic interview, we determined that Jane was at risk for psychosis based on attenuated symptoms or subthreshold symptoms, along with a family history and functional decline. We also learned about many of Jane's strengths, including a strong group of friends who were sticking by her despite her recent challenges, solid pre-symptom functioning, a mom who would do anything for her, and an engaged school with teachers, counselors, and administrators who cared. Jane was struggling academically, but wasn't failing, and teachers and Miss Smith wanted her to remain in her current classes. Okay, so my first question is about, given that last statement, um, what do you think would be the best setting for her, or excuse me, plan for her, an IEP or a 504? All right. So for me, I think probably, um, based on this information, 504 would be better. 504, little less formal. We don't need a whole new educational program for her. And that was sort of indicative of that last statement where her teachers were wanting her to stick in her current classroom. And in fact, at the time, the team agreed that a 504 would be better for Jane. Now, with respect to how Jane was doing in class, her teachers described her as anxious, and Jane said it was difficult for her to concentrate in class. She was turning to work late and not finishing assignments in class. Academically, many of the accommodations that seemed best for Jane seemed good for any student, actually, regardless of diagnosis, and but those that had similar problems to Jane. So my next question is, what accommodations might you recommend for Jane? Okay, maybe take a second, think about that. Here are a few thoughts. Now, I love the idea of extended time on exams as it helps alleviate the stress and anxiety associated with time constraints. Preferential seating can improve focus. Note-taking assistance, such as allowing the student to record lectures without any fuss, that can be very beneficial. Flexibility in attendance and assignments, including accommodations for absences and extended deadlines, were particularly useful for Jane. These adjustments helped her get back on her feet. Mental health services also played a big role for her recovery and just, her trajectory. And the school's support was really helpful for that as well. Our team collaborated very well with the school and their mental health support team. And I think there was a comprehensive approach to care that was really helpful for her. Another helpful accommodation was offering alternate exam formats. For instance, Jane performed better with multiple choice questions than traditional essay style exams. The teachers were very accommodating and very willing to create different testing formats tailored to her needs. As an educator myself, I truly appreciate the extra effort they put in just for her. And these individualized accommodations, like tailored to Jane's specific needs, made a significant difference in her academic performance, as well as her overall well-being. All right, moving on. She was worried that her classmates were possibly plotting against her, making group projects particularly challenging. She also began spending more and more time thinking about her ability to predict the future. So this is more about the clinical questions. So with the question being here, what therapy strategies might be worth considering to target these concerns? For Jane, peer-to-peer mentorship was incredibly important. She already had a supportive group of friends, which was invaluable to her. In addition to her existing friends, specific peer support proved crucial for her well-being. That was orchestrated and organized. We needed to work on her social skills as well and address her growing level of suspiciousness. This involved using cognitive behavioral therapy techniques such as Socratic questioning to help her analyze her reactions to her friends. We encouraged her to consider alternative explanations for their behavior and develop experimental hypotheses for future interactions to challenge her hostile attributions at this point or at that point. Now, peer support and stigma reduction efforts in the school were also very important. Some teachers integrated mental health topics into their curriculum very subtly, normalizing these discussions without making like a big deal about it or making it specific to Jane. And this approach helped to reduce stigma and fear around mental health issues. In other situations, I've conducted school assemblies to talk about mental health and related symptoms. I didn't do that in Jane's school, but these sessions aim to normalize mental health issues and reinforce the idea that people with psychosis or at risk for psychosis are far more similar to others than they are different. So by fostering peer support, enhancing social skills, reducing stigma in the school, we were able to create a more supportive and understanding community for Jane. Some of the professionals on the team, as I write here, they didn't subscribe to our clinical formulation. One mental health professional contended that the problem was autism. One teacher was afraid that her unusual behaviors, like spontaneous grimacing, portended violence. Another teacher said she needed to suck it up, and her coach was confused, and her nurse was demanding pharmacological care. Now, how would you work with these and related differences of opinion? This is about addressing differences of opinion among the team leaders. This wasn't easy, but it was helpful to implement a multifaceted approach that included education, consultation, and open communication. Now, here are a few ideas that we tried, and some of them worked better than others. But general psychoeducation. Folks are more similar than they are different. I might start by providing general psychoeducation to all team members, emphasizing that people with psychosis are far more similar to others than they are different. Highlight common misconceptions and reinforce the idea that everyone deserves understanding and support. Psychoeducation, in this case, the difference between autism and psychosis. We did conduct targeted educational sessions to clarify the differences between autism and psychosis with this group. Explaining the specific symptoms and characteristics of each condition can help professionals accurately differentiate and then have better treatment planning that aligns with the label that's most accurate. Psychoeducation about risk for violence. Now, educating the team about actual risk for violence with psychosis helped a lot. Emphasizing that people with psychosis are far more likely to be victims rather than perpetrators of violence, and implementing stigma reduction programs to help. The risk of violence among people with psychosis is very minimal. Medication consultations. It's possible, to arrange for a comprehensive medication consultation. If it's possible, then that's good. Ensuring that the nurse and other team members are informed about these recommendations and understand the rationale behind them could get people on the same page. That's a tough one, but in particular, facilitating regular meetings about all this stuff, that medication or the other stuff, really where the team members can share their thoughts and observations and concerns and suggestions. That encourages collaboration. And that collaboration, in Jane's case, was really what I think one of the key factors to her success. All right. Now, Mom was extremely worried and expressing her concerns for Jane's well-being in very overt ways. She was doing things like hovering, possibly being a little more involved. Sometimes she was, using some or making critical comments. So, what ways could we best support Miss Smith? Mind you, not all of these things are possible or viable, but some things that could be useful are included here. Miss Smith was extremely worried and expressed her concerns in important ways. But providing respite care was something that we had access to at that time, and that provided temporary relief for her and allowed her to rest and recharge. We tried connecting Miss Smith with a support group offered by the National Alliance on Mental Illness. These groups can provide parents with a community of individuals who understand their experiences. We work to facilitate individual therapy for Miss Smith to help her process her emotions and address any underlying issues contributing to her stated anxiety. Psychoeducation, teaching her about psychosis, giving her some tips for caregiving, effective communication, were all things that we were trying to do to empower Miss Smith to be the best version of herself that she could be. Offering financial support can be helpful to alleviate some of these burdens. That's where case management or care coordination can come into play to provide some resources. We tried to ensure Ms. Smith had access to advocacy services that could help her navigate the healthcare and education systems more effectively. Advocates can assist with understanding Jane's rights, accessing resources, and making informed decisions about her care. And then lastly, encouraging open, honest, and regular communication between Ms. Smith, the healthcare team, and the school can that kind of helped foster a collaborative approach. Communication lines being open, keeping Ms. Smith informed and involved in decision making helped her feel more in control and gave her more actual control and helped support her and Jane in really positive ways. So our approach focused on supporting Jane and working closely with the school to alter her trajectory positively and preventing a similar path that her brother experienced. And I think by providing comprehensive support and addressing her unique needs early, we aimed to ensure and reach that goal of a healthier and more successful outcome for Jane. All right, so to conclude, instead of summarizing everything, I want to highlight some key supportive principles that are essential, even if we're not formally working within a supported education space, but are supporting a child in schools. These principles come from the supported education principles, and they include everyone should be progressing and learning. Students should have the opportunity to attend school if they want. Early intervention is better. Mental health care should be integrated into education. Support should not be time limited. Interventions should be driven by the client. They are the North Star. Approaches should be strength based, and we should recognize that a student's role is meaningful and important. All right. So that's all I have today. I want to thank you so much for joining me, and I sincerely hope that some of this information can be useful for your work in serving some of our most vulnerable community members. Thank you again.
Thank you for joining us for this session in our Early Psychosis Learning Series. The Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services extends gratitude to our collaborating partners, the Tennessee Association of Mental Health Organizations and Park Center, for their support in bringing this series to life, and to our presenter, Dr. Jason Schiffman, for generously sharing his time, knowledge, and expertise. Thank you again for your commitment to learning and for the vital work you do. We hope you continue to engage with the series and take away insights that support your practice and the young people we serve.